If you run a small business, you need the most from every investment. That's why Comcast Business gives you more, like our new gig speed Wi-Fi, plus unlimited data, all on the largest, fastest, reliable network for small businesses. Comcast Business, powering possibilities.
Don't miss our special holiday offer and ask how to get up to a $750 prepaid card with a qualifying bundle. Call today. Ends 12/4/2022. Restrictions apply. Requires gigabit extra bundle with 2-year agreement.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hi everybody, I'm here today with Bahamia Ulysse. Not only is she a LVN, but she is also the founder of Ulysse Advocacy and Consulting Boutique. This is for her geriatric care management agency. She covers the area in Southern California and abroad, and I thought it would be great to have her on in this time. So welcome on, Bahamia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica, for having me. I appreciate you.
Definitely. I was going over some stuff online, and I came across your group, and I thought it was really interesting because your advocacy, it had to have come from somewhere. This caregiving, a lot of us are tossed into it. It's a reaction to life. So what was your moment of inspiration or even event that got you to create your business?
Well, so I want to say that it wasn't an actual event or moment. I've been a nurse for the last 15 years. And one of the greater things I would say the greater things that we are trained as nurses is to be advocates for our patients. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely something that rings throughout all of your care. It's like that silver lining mm-hmm. that you always want to be the person that sticks up for your patient, and not so much, in the face of doctors who have malintent or anything like that, but even for people who just don't know enough about the system, about their disease process, about whatever they're going through in that particular moment. So I think to answer that question, it's more so that it's always been a part of who I am. I've been, like I said, a nurse for so long that I don't really remember doing anything different. So that's where I've always just been an advocate, and I thought that would be a big part of what I do moving forward as I move away from the bedside.
That's awesome. I definitely liked when I saw that on your website that you help caregivers to navigate the insurance systems and the benefit options and their healthcare interventions, because these are things that none of us really consider until you're in that moment and you're going through the process, and now you're trying to figure out who can help. And that's great that you are definitely one of those that came forward. So, yeah. And that's another thing that in that coming forward, in that process of coming forward in that, I also like that you had pointed out in one of your statements that kind of a true false for you to consider, for the caregivers to consider. My family physician is the expert on how to care for my loved one with dementia. And to me, I've learned the hard way, that's false. Mm-hmm. How do you help your caregivers with that?
So basically, it's going to so I think the foundation of where I come in the picture is almost like I said, the professional caregiver or the professional family member. Mm-hmm. It really starts with creating a care plan. And I think that's where most family members, caregivers kind of get tripped up, because no one really says that in terms of it being directly associated with how they become or how they decide to go on this caregiver journey. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times you get into the hospital setting or even the long-term care setting, and they say, okay, well, this is a care plan, and we're going to do and that's that. And it sounds good. You don't know or have a reference or point of reference to basically, look at it against or hold it up against. And everybody goes along their merry ways, but no one is there in the interim, like after your loved one is discharged or even while you're making some really tough decisions. The care plan is designed to help you really just have a roadmap. And that's how I felt like I could best help family members and caregivers who are family members, is by helping them build that or create that roadmap. So when they come to certain, points or crossroads, they know if they make said decision, what the probable outcome might be, and they're prepared for the outcome and ready to move forward.
That is wonderful, because that is something that I had to find out the hard way. And it's what adds to the stress. It gives you, because making those decisions and not knowing the possible outcome, or even there being multiple outcomes. And so it's really hard to make those decisions, and having someone that you can say, hey, I need help with this. What do you think? It can be a loaded question sometimes, but having someone else's input, especially someone who's been in that industry and knows what to expect, what they can expect going forward, not only does it help them make those decisions, but it alleviates so much stress while they're in that situation, because they already know what to expect.
Absolutely. And that's usually the bigger issue, is the fear of the unknown. It just creates so much anxiety, overwhelm, and just, chaos. I think that's really where my heart went out to caregivers and family members, because it would tear them apart making these decisions, which, don't get me wrong, they're very hard decisions, a lot of them. But if there was just a little bit more preparedness, like you said, or if there was just some kind of idea that it wasn't emotionally going to overwhelm you, that's where I felt like, it would help. It can't eradicate all of the issues, but there's definitely a way to ease you into having to make these decisions.
And that's the key, easing into this, because we don't typically plan on these type of things happening. Helping someone living with dementia is no different than helping a family member who has a special needs child, for example, or someone who is trying to care for a loved one that's in the midst of a cancer illness and the process that goes along with it. When you're in that moment trying to ease every single stressful moment that you can possibly do, in that it's the difference of how your loved one survives through it and how you actually survive through it. Because caregivers, they're so focused on caring for their loved ones that it's really easy to forget about themselves.
You brought up so many good points, Jessica. I feel like I could unpack every last statement, but there's two pieces that I wanted to just point out. One was the caregiver trauma that you just mentioned. So if there was another reason why I decided that this was kind of going to be my calling, is because I was tired of hearing people describe their caregiving experience as traumatic. And even if they didn't say the word trauma, everything around, all the words they were using were indicating trauma, right? I mean, I could go down the list. We probably don't have enough time for that, but it's real. It's real. And I hated that people looked back at that point in their life as just so sad, so hard, so tough. And it's not that it's not going to be all those things, but there are different things that were associated with it. And I just felt for them. And I wanted that, of course, I couldn't help them, but I wanted for people who are coming down that same path, because it's all the same path. And that just brings me to my second point, or the second point that you made, is that whether you're caring for a loved one who's aging, or caring for a sick child, or caring for someone who, in my case, I didn't know was from the professional point of view, it's all the same. Caregiving is all the same. It takes so much from you emotionally, mentally, physically, that it exhausts you as a caregiver, and we don't know how to recognize it. And a lot of us, because maybe that's just how we're built, we don't want to seek help, or we don't know where to get it. So those two things really were if I could heal caregivers, this was the vehicle that I could use to do it.
Absolutely. Because that is yet another great statement that you put out there. If I ask for help, I'm admitting that I am weak and incapable. I have said that myself. And even if I haven't said it out loud, there have been numerous moments that I have thought that to myself, to kind of suck it up and get through the day, and tomorrow will be a better day, and try to positive talk myself into the next moment or the next day, to have those feelings that don't really go away.
Right.
And so one of the things
100%.
It's interesting to me is that, caregiving, it's been around. I mean, this isn't anything new. What is new, and what I believe to be new about caregiving, is that it's happening for people to begin their caregiving younger and younger and younger. This is no longer, yes, there are those caregivers that they may have a special needs child or a special needs sibling, and so they are experiencing that sooner in life. But at the same time, when you look at caregiving in the terms of aging or other illnesses related with cancer even, and there's so many, and I don't mean to single those out. There's so many other areas that caregivers come in. But the thing is that it's happening to people. Not only are there millions, like I can't even give you an accurate stat right now, because even what came out on national reports for 2020 has grown exponentially. Instead of the average caregiver being someone who is close to their retirement age, whether it's between their 55 or 65, average caregivers now are millennials that are in the age range in their mid-20s, probably around 25, 27. And that's
you got it.
Unreal when you think about that. And so that's where I've kind of come from, this proactive thing, because we do have to prepare. It's happening sooner than we can ever expect.
Absolutely. You've done your homework, Jessica. That's why it's true. It's true. No, you've got the numbers right. And that's part of why I even opened an Instagram account, because it really, I think that's where you might have found me, but really, my target market, if we're talking in terms of, who you would want to reach, they're pretty much on Facebook, right? You would think that everybody, I would say mid to late 40s and over, hangs out on Facebook. But what I found, and what you found, is the same, that millennials are having to try to figure out their life at 27 and also care for their aging, and not even really aging, but like pre-retired parent who suffers from ALS or has early onset dementia, a lot of things. And they have nowhere to turn. The support groups they're not appropriate, because they generally can't really relate to anybody else in the support groups aside from being a caregiver. There is no true kind of path for people who are millennials and above, or I guess that mid sandwich generation type millennial. There really isn't a true out and out system for that.
Right. And there isn't. And that was a lot of my frustrations. And I found the first support group that I found was very beneficial, and I did learn a lot from it. But it did take me to be willing to go and attend, because the first time or two that I went, I felt like I was so out of place. I mean, it wasn't for the purpose that I was there. I wasn't trying to connect with a clique, but it was odd that everyone, to me, it was like I didn't feel like I belonged there. I felt out of place. Everyone there, at the time I started, I was 37, 38. And when I started attending, everyone there were in their mid to late 60s and up, caring for their older parents. And so it took me actually sitting and feeling comfortable to listen to their stories, to learn from them. And that's when I realized, unless there's someone who's willing to share their stories, then who do I learn from? And who do others learn from, And I did, and now that you say that, I did find you on Instagram. And so going across the information, it seems to be the new way of reaching out to people. And
Mm-hmm.
I did the same. I was like, I want to reach as many people to share the stories, to find, give them a voice and help connect them in a community with others to find those resources.
Absolutely. And you do need to find a click. I know that no one likes the word, but you have to find a click because this road is a long one. And so along with people starting it very young, right? That means that they're in it longer. The average, before I would say the last decade, your average caregiving journey would last anywhere from, at the low end, 2 years, a high end, 6 years. Now we're seeing low end at 4 years, high end at 10 plus years, Jessica.
Right.
It's a long time. And, no one knows. That's the other part. You start with a caregiver journey and you're saying, oh yeah, I can do this. But if someone says, okay, yeah, you're going to be doing this for the next 9 years.
Yeah.
You might say, oh, wait a minute.
Exactly. Well,
let me, this needs a plan, right? We need to plan this out. But many people don't get that opportunity. And that's where a lot of the trauma comes from, whether it's resentment, feeling of guilt, feeling, that they missed out on certain parts of their life, their family, all because they decided to assume the role of caregiver. And it's such an ugly topic, I guess, because no one wants to talk about those inner feelings.
Right.
And it shows all over your caregiving style, all over your ability to kind of interact and just manage your own life. I just want to have more awareness around how we deal with this, because like you said, it's been around forever, but culturally, different norms kind of make this a mandatory thing to do. So you almost don't have a choice. You're supposed to do it, but no one says this is how you do it and manage your life. And things are changing. Things have changed always. But yes, that was just a good point I wanted to put out bring out.
And like you said, that no one wants to be obvious about and honest about their caregiving struggles, because no one wants to say this sucks. No one wants to say the real things, because they don't want you to see, they don't want to be seen as the jerk. They don't want to be seen as that vulnerable person. None of this. I don't think any of us say, what, when I grow up, I'm going to be a caregiver. It's one thing for you to say you went to school to become a nurse. You had a profession that provided all sorts of directions for you to go in. So, but the whole idea of solely looking forward to planning and really sacrificing your life for someone else, it's not selfish to say, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. People, squirmish about that. And without that plan in place to know what direction you're going in, no matter if it is going to be that 2 year or 9 year. I know for me, if we had that plan put in place in advance, a lot of the caregiver sibling rivalry could have been avoided as well. And
oh yes, that's another level. So many levels.
Yes, and that was another level I wanted to get into, because I was thinking, why for siblings who have grown together and, making the assumption that maybe you had a close relationship with your siblings. Maybe some of you are estranged even before the caregiving began. And I've heard other caregivers that say they have brothers and sisters, but I'm the only one. Why does it always end up where there's always one, and regardless of the scenarios, why is this so hard for siblings to handle this or approach this caregiving journey together? What do you think?
So I don't have all the answers, but I have some sneaking suspicions. Family dynamics is my specialty. And a lot of what I try to promote when I start the caregiver care plan, because I always separate it into two care plans. One care plan is for you as a caregiver. The other care plan is for your loved one, because they're very different things. They will have intersections. They definitely will. But I stress, especially when it comes to family dynamics, that you cannot expect for anyone to step up in this moment if they've never stepped up in other moments, and you know what moments they are.
Right.
So
It's true.
a big part of this is misplaced expectations. I'll just give you an example. I was talking to one of my family members, and she was, I guess she was very upset. I won't use the word. She was very upset that her brother and sister weren't basically stepping up. They all lived within a decent amount of, I would say probably 20 to 30 minutes of their mother. And three kids, the expectation that she was the one that was going to handle everything was very, very bothersome for her. And, you know, we sat down during one of our sessions, and I let her explore her feelings. And at the end, I asked her, just point blank, when you were growing up, who did most of the housework between, you know, the three of you?
Right.
Who was it that your mom called on when she needed something done? And, you know, we went through these different questions. I have different prompts and things like that. And when she finally got down to the fact that most of those answers were her, I asked her, I said, so why would you now expect for all of a sudden for your mother to need and want someone else and for them to step up? I mean, when people grow up in a household where one or two siblings are always the go-to, that doesn't stop. It won't ever stop far into your adulthood. So my advice is manage it the way that you would when you think, just kind of go back to when you were kids and when you did manage it and how you manage it then. Express how you want things to look moving forward. But ultimately understand that we are who we are. There isn't going to be much change from your brother or sister's personality, and trying to, for lack of a better phrase, fit a square peg into a round hole at this point in time is going to drive you crazy. It is literally going to be a huge source of frustration, sadness, depression even, and ultimately burnout, right? Those are all the symptoms of caregiver burnout. And you're in this for the long haul. So sometimes it can go so far as to say, you know what, well, leave them out of it. If they want to make decisions, and that's usually the tough part, that's where the family dynamic gets sticky.
Right.
You have brothers and sisters who don't want to be involved, who don't want to step up, but they do have a lot to say. I call them the peanut gallery. They have a lot to say about
their opinions,
about the decisions you're making, about the way you're doing things, and about how they feel things should be done, but they will not step up. And, you know, there are certain techniques that I use around that, but ultimately you have to protect your own energy, your own ability to basically weather this storm, if it is one, and continue along your caregiver path. So definitely family dynamics are always going to be kind of like a sub-layer to all of this, because when you choose to care for someone at home, it is looking at your immediate family or whoever your close ones, the ones that you kind of would think of as being responsible or sharing responsibility. They are the caregiver circle. So, you know, whatever was happening in that family circle is also going to come up in the caregiver circle. And people almost can never separate the two.
That's so true. It is. The journey just kind of blends together, and it becomes difficult to separate your emotions with the family from the actual caregiving time period with your loved one. I know I've lived through that myself, which is why it comes to that next. I did get to the point where I knew I needed to reach out and find some outside support, and not just caregiver support group, but actual individual personal therapy. Because like you said, the caregiving history, it wasn't like we just suddenly started fighting. And that's what I didn't recognize in the early stages. We didn't just start fighting as the caregiving started. It was the history of who we were growing up, that whatever unresolved issue, whatever bickering, fightings, that we just kind of left alone years ago. Whether, I have two siblings, and as we married and went to school, married, had kids, and we all kind of, our lives pulled us in different directions. It's like all that old stuff just resurfaced right away. And it was right there. Yes. And it was just right there. And so then it gets to the point where, or I reached that point where I was saying, what's the point of talking about it when I'm going through this? Because if I say something about it, I'm wrong. If I say more about it, then I'm hurting someone else's feelings. And so I just won't talk about it at all. And that's a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Waiting
to explode. And it will explode. And it's going to explode at the worst time. It's just going to be the trigger of everything. And you're right. It's all things from the past come straight front and center. And, I've sat in on blowouts where, I would constantly hear, just being the onlooker, well, you always, and you always, and so it has nothing to do with the actual situation. It's about the relationship. It's about how sisters, brothers and sisters, stepmoms and stepchildren, how they've always kind of skirted around certain issues. Right. And the worst is when nothing had been decided prior to said time. So that's usually where, a lot of this energy comes from, is that you have to make the hard decisions and there's no guidance around it. And everybody feels like they know what mom or dad would have wanted. And it's different across the board.
Right. And what they may have voiced years prior to their needs is totally different from when they're actually in the moment of need. Because I know when growing up, there was the jokes around everything. If I ever live to this age and this is what I'm facing this and that, just put me in a box, or just, there were always those statements that just kind of laugh it off and push it away. And don't ever put me in a nursing home. You might as well kill me. And so you get to those moments, and right away the siblings, I'm sure, and especially in my own personal, well, mom never would have done that. Mom would have wanted this, or dad wouldn't have said that. Dad didn't want that. And we are fighting a war, basically, that no one's going to win.
Nope, you're right. And it's a good point that you make, just kind of tracing back to, this is a big one that I deal with, parents who have said, and this is where a lot of the guilt comes from, don't ever put me in a nursing home. Whatever you do, don't ever put me in a nursing home.
Absolutely.
I cannot tell you the amount of clients, patients, caregivers that I have worked with that feel that it tears them up, utterly guilty that they have to place their loved one in a nursing home or an assisted living or anywhere outside of their home, not aging in place.
Right.
And I always come back to, it's easy to say something like that. However, if there was no plan around it, if your loved one did not put systems and structures in place to make sure that that was not a burden for you, then that is not a promise that you should feel like you should have to keep.
Right.
And a lot of that is really tough for people to kind of get through, because especially culturally, different cultural norms say, well, they cared for you as a child, so it's now your responsibility to care for them as an adult. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that mindset, especially if you're not in the position to do so. We all would like to have things be see things through rose-colored lenses.
Right.
However, it is what it is. If you're a single mom, for instance, struggling to just make ends meet, and you have children and you have work and you have all these other things going on, you can't add caregiving to the plate just because you think you're supposed to. it's not going to lend itself to anybody, and you're going to ultimately get burnt out, and you're going to feel even more guilty when you have to make the decision to place or get help because, you've done all this stuff and now you failed, right? So I always advise my clients, I understand what they told you, but if there's nothing in place, you've got to take a step back. You've got to think about what's good for you. You've got to think about what's good for your family and ultimately what's good for them. But that self-sacrifice thing, it's a tough tab to pay when it means that you uproot your entire life for something that isn't making you happy.
Right.
It's not a lot of the time. And if it is, perfect. You've got a great situation. There's less work for me to have to do. We're going to put these things in place and off we go. But oftentimes it's not. And especially in your late 20s and 30s, it doesn't exactly make you happy. And you don't exactly have your life put together at that point. So it's a good point. I just wanted to zero in on that.
Especially when you're in your 20s and 30s. And for me, looking forward to having my life and working through retirement and being able to retire and travel. And I had my life plan in my mind. None of that life plan included caregiving. None of that included sibling rivalry. None of that included having to make those tough decisions that included assisted living or memory care or anything along those lines. So making those decisions and not feeling guilty about it, well, I, of course, felt guilty about it. There was no question about it.
Of course.
I'm still
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Slowly getting
and it's going to always be there.
Yeah. And it is, it gets to be less and less, but it's not gone. Because every time I get a chance to speak with my mom, she'll bring up, when can I go home?
Yeah. I know. It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
And that's where it brings me back to the first comment that you were making, or I made earlier, about how you had said, I'm not good at caregiving. I'm not a professional, because that's what it eventually gets me. It got me to feel. And that's where I know other caregivers get to that point where you push up to the limits, like culture says you have to do it. So I'm going to do it. And I do it as long as I get up to that limit where I know I don't want to go any further, or I can't go any further. And that guilt starts to set in, and that resentment starts to bubble and build. And then I have to say, okay, throw my hands up. I can't do this anymore. How do you let a caregiver that says that know, like guilt-free, don't worry?
So I don't think that's ever going to go away, especially because the foundation of why you feel guilty is always going to be there, right? So here's what I usually try to give my caregivers as an assignment or a task, if they will. I say to them, and I always have a journal. That's a huge thing that I have incorporated in my work. Yeah, it's been amazing. And the journal that I use has prompts. We have tables. We have different. It's almost like a workbook, more or less. But I mean, there's journaling because there's specific things that I want my caregivers to write about, and we review it, or they keep it to themselves. They can keep it personal. It doesn't matter. But so in this particular exercise, I ask them to literally paint the picture of what it would look like for them if they could take care of their loved one and still tend to the other responsibilities that they have in their life. And, I ask you to be as expansive as you can. If that means that you shifted your work and became a business owner and were able to have a flexible schedule, enough so that you could make enough money to have a 24-hour caregiver by your side for your mom or dad, and you could have them live in the guest house in the backyard and travel as you would, whatever it is. I mean, just literally blow it all out. Let it just take its own, its own space. And then we look at where we are now, and we paint that picture, right? What does it look like present day?
I love that.
And
you
we put
use
them up
that.
against each other.
Yeah.
It's true, though, because when you look at it, it's like, first, the exercise is designed to have you look at how realistic or unrealistic your feelings are, because your feels are your feels and you've got to honor your feels.
Yes.
Right? How realistic or unrealistic is it? And if it is realistic, well, let's plan and map out how we get there, even if it takes a year or two. Because some people aren't really as far away from that ideal picture as they think.
Right.
They just haven't really put it down on paper, or they haven't really thought about it long enough
So
to
it feels
really...
like it's far away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, sometimes things take longer than others, but, we've got time. There's not a lot that's going to change. Nothing has to happen. I mean, not in most cases. Sometimes, yes, we do have less than 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is.
Right.
And that's a whole other deal.
Oh,
but I think we're mainly we're talking more about like the long-term care of caregiving, the long-term journey. And sometimes it does require you to shift. Just like you said, you weren't thinking about any of this when you were planning out the next decade of your life. Right?
Definitely.
So now we have to replan, for lack of a better word, the next decade of your life.
Readjust.
What is it going to look like? So it's funny, I'm a geriatric care manager, but I also call myself a caregiver life coach, because this is a caregiver life. Like, this is a different life, right? You have your life coach and that's everything, right? That's good. But you need a caregiver life coach that understands this piece, because this is actually one of the bigger pieces that you'll actually end up, it's like the sun of your life, right? You have to make every decision around it. And whether that means, hiring someone or doing placement or whatever it is, it alters how you make other decisions.
Definitely. And, and it's interesting that you use that example of writing out the plan of the back house and the pool and traveling and how it would be, because I can't tell you how many times I have been standing doing dishes or laundry, and I let my mind just roam. And there's been times when I go to lay down at night and these stresses run through my mind, and I try to calm myself, visualizing that scenario, that if the best case scenario would be where I could make everybody happy, this is how it would be done. And it's calming until reality sets in, but it does help long enough for me to, distract myself from those stresses. And then once I actually bring it down to, because I believe so wholeheartedly the benefits of journaling. And so when I do write it down, it is in my mind and I visualize it, and it doesn't feel so distant. It doesn't feel like it can't happen. It's a plan, a work in process that it's not just going to be this and only this. I have something to look forward to.
Big deal. Big point. I can't stress that enough. That is huge, because I think people kind of discount the power of manifestation and how, things actually get pulled out of thin air. I mean, you look at this world that we're living in today, right? I'm not smart enough for half the things, technologically speaking, that happen, right? I just know that. But someone was, and someone had to pull it from somewhere and set it down on paper and put action to it.
Right.
So it's such a huge gift you can give to yourself, because, you can work that plan, and it may not always look how you might have envisioned it. And once it does come to fruition in full manifestation, but it will give you that sense of accomplishment. And I think that's a lot of what caregivers tend to lack, is that, they don't feel accomplished in their journey.
I have to agree again wholeheartedly, because I could say the days that I struggled the most is because I didn't feel productive. I didn't feel like I accomplished anything. It was a rinse repeat day. And it definitely affected me that way.
Yeah, for sure. I know the caregiver journey well.
Definitely. And so making this plan in the beginning stages, it's hopeful knowing the road that you're going to be on. In advance, half of the strength and the power in your journey is knowing, but it can be adapted as you go, especially as things change. And even, from my experience, the person living with dementia their world changes faster than we can keep up sometimes.
Sure.
And so then you go from this initial plan that's in place to suddenly you're having to look at an end of life plan. How do you approach that type of procedure?
Sure. You're right on the money when you say, things are changing faster than you can really keep up with. Pivoting is a huge part of caregiving. You really do have to roll with the punches. And yes, like you said, that is what having that plan is about. That's why in that plan, or the care plan that I create with my clients, one of the very first things that we address is end of life. Because honestly, especially with, most of the caregivers I work with, I'm dealing with the geriatric population. Mm-hmm. So, I hate to say it, but the fact of the matter is what we're generally doing is end of life planning.
Right.
If you look at the, lifespan, anybody past the age of 75, maybe 80, is considered end of life. You're not at the beginning, you're not at the middle. Mm-hmm. We're looking at the rest of your days. So whether you want to look at end of life as the last 6 months of your life or the last 6 years of your life, we have to start looking at that first. So I always reverse engineer the process with my clients. I ask them straight up because, people are able to have this conversation, even though it's a daunting one, very heavy. They're able to have this conversation better when they're not in the midst of their crisis. So we go through the details. We talk about what it is that they would like to have done down to the very day or ceremony or service, whatever it is. And we make sure that's in place first.
That's perfect.
I know it sounds morbid.
No, that's perfect.
It has to happen.
It does.
Because I was a hospice nurse before I decided to branch out and start this business. And that is the last thing I learned from that work. The last thing that you really want to have to be concerned about when you're mourning or when you're in the process of mourning and grieving. What funeral home do you want to take care of your loved one, or what would their last rites have been, or things of that nature. And you want to know that they were able to transition in peace.
Certainly.
And you want peace. You want to just be the grieving daughter, son, spouse. You don't want to have to be the manager of all things, right?
It is tough. It is very tough. We actually lived that with my father. When he got sick with pneumonia, we had 3 weeks that we, prayed and hoped for the best. But at some point, it was a little bit more obvious that there wasn't going to be the rehabilitation center afterwards for him with his tracheotomy and so forth. And so when the time came and he did pass, it's exactly what you said. In the moment, the last thing I wanted to think of was planning his funeral and even thinking of what he would have wanted at that time. I was still trying to be as hopeful as possible, but sitting in the funeral home just within days. I mean, he passed on a Monday and by Thursday we're in the funeral home. Yep. That is rough because you're trying to grieve and you're having to make, again, choices that you don't even want to have to consider or think about it. And a lot of times the financial aspect of it all of a sudden hits you. And it's something
you took the words right out of my mouth.
Yes. And so it's something that we don't plan for, in addition to all this other planning that we don't prepare for. That is definitely one of the last things, because so many times we think, oh, later, we have time. We don't have to worry about that now. And when later happens, regardless of why, it's still just as difficult having to deal with that and be blindsided with it when, if you knew and you proactively set it up in advance, the stress of that financial part would be gone.
Yes. and that even, yes, so the thing about the finances is something that I wanted to just put out there. Funeral homes, services are expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And, no one really looks into those prices until they have to.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't want to be a financial burden to their family.
No.
I know my grandfather recently passed, and he, didn't have a lot of money, wasn't ever really wealthy, but somehow he had saved enough money to have his services done, whatever it was.
Nice.
And I wish I could say that for most people, but unfortunately, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you have families grieving and mourning for their loved one, but then also looking at themselves and looking at whoever's around for help, financial help.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they can get it, sometimes they can't. And when they can't, there's a whole nother level of feeling inadequate. So all of these things, people say, I can't even bury my father in the way
Right.
that he should be. And, looking back, when you are out of the situation, you could say how absurd that was, that you would feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But in the moment, it feels really terrible because you are so emotionally distraught.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I stress it up front. And once we have that first session, it's literally my first session with my clients. And I say, okay, so now that we have the morbid stuff out of the way, let's get down to the crux of it. Yeah, because it needs to happen. It needs to.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's how I do it.
I love that because I think all of this journey is hard. It's kind of like you can't look at it like a mountain that you're climbing and there's this crest and then you eventually, no, it's all up and down throughout the whole entire, but that end result of the journey is almost like you hit the brick wall after everything you've gone through with your loved one. And then to have that moment hit, you hit the brick wall, and then grieving takes that much longer because you want to give that last bit to them. Yes, they may have made it through their journey and they're at peace. You want to give that very last gift to them, just knowing that everything is taken care of in the end.
Absolutely. No, very true. It's a very tough kind of journey, a part of that journey. But, I always tell people at each moment, you just, if you can, just step outside of it, step outside of you, step outside of the circumstance, and just remind yourself that you're a human being doing the best that you can. Mm-hmm. You're not Superman. You're not Superwoman. You are doing the very best that you can. And that's always good enough. It's always going to be good enough.
That's true. I like that.
Easier said than done, I know.
But having those kind of thoughts in your mind to begin with, it helps to keep the other thoughts of I'm not good enough at bay. Right. It's like that meditation, that mantra that I can sit down and I've personally had to do that where I can meditate and say, I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough until I feel good in that and rest in that. So then as I go throughout the day, the caregiving day, and no matter what decisions I have to make, I feel the anxiety build. And then I immediately drop into that. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough.
Yes. You
don't forget.
That's part of my journal package. No, it's true. That's part of the workbook that I have because you have to have your anchoring thoughts. Good point, Jessica.
Yes.
Good point.
And it
your
takes,
anchoring thoughts.
Yes, those anchoring thoughts that help you because it does take something. You have to find something that anchors you because otherwise it is too easy to be so emotionally involved in this and wrapped into this. And you're bickering with your siblings. You're struggling with the care of your loved one. You're just trying to do the right thing for them or their best, meet their best interest. And they're just being them, they're going through this process. My mom would say, aging sucks. And it was like, stop being such a hard person. Stop giving me a hard time. But, and it wasn't that she was doing anything on purpose. It's just, you're going through this moment. And it was like, if I didn't have that anchoring thought that I could take that quick, deep breath and just, I am enough. I am enough. It's just, otherwise, definitely. Because otherwise I'm spending the rest of the day hyperventilating, waiting for that. It's got to be 5:00 somewhere. Caregiver happy hour needs to start now. I need that glass of wine.
It's very real. Jessica, you are not alone. I'm telling you. Look, this is very, very real. This is how it happens. And I had a client who says, I carried this workbook around like my Bible. I all of a sudden become a workbook toting caregiver. And I said, that's funny, but if that's true. What helps you, hang on tight, because those days just to get through. I mean, this is where I tell you about that caregiver burnout and the depression and the anxiety. Those things set in, and they take residence.
Yes, and at
that point,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, that residence that it takes is one of the points I had made before of in earlier podcasts of the boomerang effect, because we spend our time, however long that journey is, caring for that person. And this takes effect in our bodies. And then guess what happens when you're done with your grieving? Their journey's over with and yours begins. And then your children have to step in because you gave everything to your caregiving journey, that there was nothing left, even not just emotionally, but physically for yourself. And that boomerang comes right back.
You've got it. Yes. You got it. It's a big deal. And I don't think people take that into consideration. And I don't think that we are all aware collectively within the next decade that this is going to be a very prevalent issue in families. And I think that's where, again, if I had to call this a calling or a mission or something, it would be, my responsibility or light to help shine the light on this and give the awareness of what this is going to look like for you.
Definitely.
And really just talk about it with your children who may not necessarily be of age to take certain responsibilities, but it also goes back to what your family unit is like. Right. I have families where grandchildren are also responsible for taking care of their aging loved ones, grandparents. And they work it in a family, they work it as a family, and that's how they function. So everybody has their own traditions, so to speak, or their own code. But the point of me stepping in is to get it down on paper so that everybody understands and we're on the same page about what's happening. And things, like you said, will shift. People will change. Responsibilities will change. But we have to come back to the middle. And that middle, in my world, is a care plan.
So with this care plan that you're helping them with, how have the current times with COVID affected the planning that you've done? Have you had to go back and re-plan for people, adjust their plans accordingly? Or are you finding the need, a increased need for planning with this COVID pandemic?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I revisit care plans regularly anyways, because part of, the work that I do is monitoring, making sure that the plan is actually working and people who are supposed to be doing things are doing the things. This pandemic has pretty much uprooted. I was kind of actually happy that I didn't have so much of a caseload when things first started. And now I have a heavier caseload, but it's a good thing because we are now experiencing what it's like to have things go awry and have at least had a plan in place. Because a part of also the care plan is, we plan for contingencies, we plan for emergencies, we plan for natural disasters, things of that nature. So I can do a Zoom call with my client caregiver and say, okay, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go to page 19 of our plan. This is what we talked about. Do you think this is what we want to continue doing? Here's the information that I have about long-term care at this point, or hiring a private caregiver at this point. Here are the resources, and the decision's always going to be up to the caregiver and the family members. But we have had to make major adjustments because what I'm finding, just as a trend, people want to pull their loved ones out of the long-term care facilities for fear of contracting the virus and not being able to see them, things of that nature.
Right.
So we've had to make that transition, and it requires a lot. People don't understand until you have to make the transition. And in this case, it had to be expedited in some situations. So yeah, it's been especially trying, especially when routine things happen, like, mom had to go to the hospital because she fell. And normally, if she broke a hip or whatever it is, normally she'd go to the rehab, but now you don't want to send her to the rehab because of what's going on. So what's the plan? What are my other options? And yeah, we've had to do a lot of we've had to have a lot of flexibility.
Definitely.
We've definitely worked with, and I'm really putting my hat down to the social workers, case managers, doctors, and nurses who are bending over backwards to really help people get well and help them get to places that are safe for them so that, they can actually do their job. But it's been challenging.
To say the least. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we push on. We're resilient. That's the one thing about caregivers.
Right.
Caregivers are resilient.
Yes.
Right?
That's why I believe it is a calling. It is a choice.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is a choice. It is a choice, and it is a calling. And that's a good point, too, actually. I think I also, in the beginning of my practice, had to work with people who said, I don't have a choice. Or I have to. Right. And so those things are real in many situations. And, we can go with that narrative, and that's okay, but it doesn't help. That narrative doesn't support you in times where you find it exceptionally difficult. So sometimes I would ask them to say, instead of saying, I have to, say I get to.
Right.
I'm honored to. And if it doesn't feel right in the moment, don't say it, but start thinking about it in a different way, because what I try to kind of bar away from or kind of avoid, if anything, is for caregivers to fall into victim mode. So it's very easy because, a lot is falling in on you as a caregiver. And if you weren't planning on it, it feels like it's falling in like at an exponential rate, right?
Right.
And it's easy, depending on your family dynamics, to kind of give your power away and fall into the victimization of having to do this.
That's so true.
So those are the things that I try to help my caregivers around so that they can be supportive for not only themselves, but for their loved one as well. Because at the end of the day, the loved one is the one going through it, right? You're the support system, but they're going through it. Especially with dementia. Dementia has a special place in my heart because I think throughout my career, I've mainly worked with dementia-specific folks. And I think because the disease process is so long and it's an arduous journey, people don't take into effect what it's going to look like. And when things start happening, really happening, they happen rather quickly.
Right.
And, it's kind of like it's a roller coaster, because you can, especially with dementia folk, you can think we're near the end, and then all of a sudden they rally, and it was like nothing happened.
Right.
And we can go through waves of this.
Yeah.
And so and there's something about that disease process, because every other disease process, when it looks close to the end, we're pretty much there. But dementia has another thing brewing. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of finicky in that way. So we never quite know until we know. And even then, there are surprises. But it's a lot to have to go through emotionally for the caregiver. And so I support both, right? Mm-hmm. But ultimately, there are structures to take care of your loved one. They are going to be well taken care of. I think, overly concerned about taking care of you as the caregiver.
Definitely. Because if, it's the whole put the oxygen mask on your face first and then help. If you can't do that, then it's not just your caregiver, it's both of you, or your care recipient, it's both of you that are going to be affected. Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Definitely agree. And
Thank you.
And the one thing that was since I did not have this beneficial plan in place, the one thing that was my savings grace was my mother's neurologist that did give me the heads up. It is time now. It is time to start looking at facilities. You need to get one lined up. You need to get something in place because it's about to get worse. And had she not, made that distinction for me, I would have been in the middle of it and not knowing what in the world is going on. It would just be that would have been my landslide into that caregiver victimization. Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
I'm so glad that you did have someone in your caregiver, your healthcare team to speak up.
Right.
Because that doesn't always happen, Jessica.
No,
it doesn't always happen, and it happens way too late. That's the one thing that really bothers me about the process, and I think that's where, again, another part. There's so many, motivations for me to do this work, but and not that it's any fault of the physician. I just think that sometimes people rely on their general practitioner physician as the end-all or the know-all of what's happening. Yeah. And then they're not the right person to talk to about these things. You do need a specialist. You do need a gerontologist. You do need a neurologist. You do need someone who has expertise in what you're dealing with to be able to talk to you straight.
Yes. And another valid point, because after learning the network of physicians for my mother and trying to go to each and every one of them, I realized, and unless you, and I hate to say it this way, luck out with a physician who actually had maybe their own life experience with dementia and they've had that inside look into it. Not many of them know how to approach that patient with dementia-related issues. And so you do have to find that specialist. And sometimes they don't even know to focus you in what direction. Some of them would redirect me to the cardiologist when I really needed to go to the neurologist first, or
exactly. Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, I agree.
You're 100% right.
It's a process. So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Bahamia. This information, and you hit it right on the nose. This is a calling, and this is why I'm so glad I came across you online, because we need to build our network of caregiver resources, and I want people to be able to seek you out and find you, and whether you're in Southern California or not, for those listeners that are going through these scenarios, if any of this information struck a nerve with you, I highly recommend reaching out to Bahamia. And by doing so, Bahamia, could you let them know, how do they find you online?
Absolutely. So on Instagram and Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as Nurse in the Know. You can also email me at support@nurseintheknow.com. I also have my geriatric care management business here in Southern California. It's called Give Care, Take Care. And you can also call at 323-352-6777. So you can get in contact with me in any of those ways, but ultimately I want listeners to know that you don't necessarily have to live in Southern California because I do work with long distance caregivers. So I have clients that live out of state and have their loved ones either here or in Florida and Texas who need assistance around planning, structuring, and just logistics. So I help you guys virtually make it happen. I make the calls that need to be done, and we make sure that the plan is in place so that when you do go visit, it's not a chaotic and, you're at square one type of thing.
Right. That's perfect.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate this. I'm honored that you had me on here, and I'd love to come back if you ever needed it.
Absolutely. We are building this caregiver network, and I appreciate the questions that have come out from other caregivers. And if there are any other additional questions, if this sparked another question, a branch off of anything we've talked about, definitely send those questions in to me. You can send them at www.jessicalazellecannon.com. And if it's something that Bahamia can answer for you, let us know. We'd love to chat and help you any and every way we can. I wish you all well. Thanks again, Bahamia.
Thank you so much. Okay, have a good day.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazellecannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.